We're going to kick off this year's conference by hearing from members of our Student Advisory Council.
So I think that the biggest thing that people need to take away from this who are watching is that you need to make the classroom more fun. Applying what they found in the classroom with that hands-on experience to something outside the world, which is what we really want students to do. And I think that by doing that, you're setting up kids not only to go to college, but if they don't want to pursue a college career, then going to want something that they're passionate about.
I think that something that they could do is probably listen to their students more. I remember like my junior year, and not only was it difficult because, we were going back in person, and that, junior year is just like hard in general. But I was also going through a lot of like family problems, and I think having my teachers there to try and ask me like, hey, how was your day? I think that would have been really helpful and make me feel like they care.
I think that in order for students to be successful, schools really have to be more equitable, and this is in regards to school lunches being more accessible to all students, making school sports and clubs more accessible, maybe by making like less expensive gear so people feel like they can try out the sports that they love, and also taking away the stigma surrounding AP classes as sort of the hard classes that only the super smart people can take.
A lot of people go into government hoping to change things, and they do, but education is really underrated as a tool of changing people's minds and hearts, and the power that educators and policymakers have to further students in their lives, not just as students and people who work, but also just as people who are community members, is super powerful, and the responsibility to aid students in their life paths is enormous.
We know how to help students enroll, stay in school, and graduate. We know how to move closer to 60 by 25 because we've been doing it for more than a decade. But it will take all of us sustaining our communities, maintaining our investments, and acting with the creativity and urgency this moment demands to get it done.
So recognizing these inequities in post-secondary attainment, the Illinois State Legislature has charged the Illinois P20 Council with updating the 60 by 25 goal and saying it's not enough to have one North Star that says 60% by 2025 if we are consistently leaving significant populations behind, especially given the fact that our state is continuing to change demographically. Our state is diversifying racially. We have a lot of changing dynamics at play. And so the P20 Council has been charged with updating that 60% goal to include equity-focused targets aimed at closing these gaps. I like to include this image when talking about equity because it helps us think about when it comes down to brass tacks, when it comes down to the policy and practice of impacting these inequitable outcomes, what it means is trying to figure out the ways that the different types of supports and services that individuals might need based on their particular circumstances. The same bike is not going to work for every single person, and so we have to figure out what those adjustments might be in order to really drive equitable outcomes, not just equal access to opportunity.
It's important for institutions to look at the policies that they have in place, look at the practices they have in place, and think about the intent of that policy or that practice, but then look at the data and see who it's actually impacting, and that may actually surprise them in ways that they've never actually interrogated before. So it's really important to look at what's the intent of it and who's actually being impacted, and whether or not there's ways that you can, keep standards or keep, things in place, but actually don't make it a barrier to completion.
If you're in the middle of developing a strategic plan for a priority group, please make sure you check in with the people who are going to be impacted the most. So in this case, just to bring it back to Derek Bell, the faces at the bottom of the well, or those populations at the margins, and that you're developing ideas or practices or policies, make sure you check in with them before you implement that, because you might be doing a disservice to that group of individuals, because if you don't have equal representation or representation from that group in your planning and designing of your project, you are doing it wrong. That is not the way to go. You need to have the people who are being impacted the most at the table to make decisions with you, whether they have a PhD or a GED.
Because we know, and everyone participating on this, I'm sure, agrees that higher education is the path to a better future for individuals, families, and communities, and really across the whole state of Illinois. We know we have a world-class higher education system here in Illinois, and it's changed lives for millions of families. But we also believe that to sustain a thriving Illinois, we need to have a more equitable reality. For too long, African American, Latinx, low-income, rural, and working adult students have been left behind. And we believe that Illinois' economic growth and educational equity are inseparable.
So leadership, clarity of purpose, data and accountability, and then practices and scale. I think there are many different approaches that institutions will need to take. I mean, we often say there's 101% solutions, and maybe there's some of these things that move the needle 5 or 10% if we're lucky. But I think really the scale issue is very hard. A lot of these things start out as successful programs serving 25 or 50 or 75 students, really taking that to scale so that it applies to everyone in a particular group or population. So for example, all transfer students, all freshmen, all entering students with these characteristics in their profile. Doing that is really, really hard work. And I think that is the difference between being able to move the needle on grad rates and having some pockets of excellence, of equity in an institution.
We knew that reimagining equity and access in education requires a commitment to develop cross-sector collaboration that intentionally engages partners in equity-minded action planning, right? So we had some desired outcomes regarding cross-functional representation, collaborative process, and grounding in key data points, which is culminating in a written plan for action.
One of the strong tenets of equity work is how inclusive are we? How do we collaborate? How do we engage? It isn't a one size fits all. Every single district across the state is going to be at a different point in their equity journey based upon their community context, the relationships. And I think that how advocates and funders and colleges and all of the partners that could be made available really have to keep that in mind. Learn about which districts your organization, each organization has a mission and a purpose and all of that. Which districts fit with that you can support and you can help. And be a partner, as Horton mentioned. Be a thought partner, be a person that can really help think through some of those real challenging opportunities that come up. And I think that using this approach of being very inclusive and collaborating and working through together as a community is what is really going to have the impact that we need to have to make sure every student has what they need to reach those academic standards that we've set before them.